Hey, I'm Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanism in the game Dungeon Maker Deluxe. And I will say this was sent to me. I don't usually accept free games, but this was sent to me by the co-designer of the third Tapestry expansion, Chris, who was heavily involved in this game. I like what Chris did with that third expansion with Mike, and so I wanted to try it. And he told me it was the type of game that I think I would enjoy, and I really did. He may have said that after I spoke so highly earlier this year about Stone Spine Architects, and I also love Cartographers. And this game is kind of a mashup of those two games. Basically, you are creating a dungeon, nice double-sided dungeon mats. These are dry erase mats. You choose one side, you make a dungeon on that side, and then in the second half of the game, you pass this dungeon to the player on your right, and they have to walk through your dungeon. They have to clear every room, or as many rooms as possible, in your dungeon, sacrificing health and mana along the way while they do, based on how well you built your dungeon. It is really satisfying, I would say, to both build the dungeon, try to go through someone else's dungeon, and also watch someone else try to go through the dungeon you built. All three are very satisfying aspects of the game. There's a really clever mechanism in this game tied to a component, and that component is the humble card. There are these cards in the game, and they're used in two really interesting ways based on the two halves of this game. In the first half of the game, and this is kind of an ongoing draft, and I really like this as well. This is really cool. There's no rounds to the game. Rather, it's a purely ongoing draft where you'll have 5 cards in your hand. You'll draw one from the top of the deck, choose one card from your hand to play, and then pass the rest of the cards, and then do that over again. So you always have 6 cards to choose from. There's never a break in the action. You just keep going and going and going. The game flows really well. I really like that style of draft. That might have been my favorite mechanism, were it not for the way the cards were used, and they are really, really cool in themselves. So in the first half of the game, you're building a dungeon. So you are putting dangerous things in your dungeon, like hippogriffs and dragons and jabberwocks. And when you do that, you'll draw the shape in a dungeon of your choice. You can see these different shapes that take up more space. The dragon's a little bit bigger. And you also see these icons over here. Within that shape, you are going to write up these 3 icons, or these 2 icons, or these 3 icons. Those are the types of the things that someone might encounter. So for example, for the dragon, you're going to encounter a lot of fire when you encounter the dragon in your dungeon. You'll do that. You'll choose a card, you'll play it, you'll draw that shape, you'll fill that shape with those icons, and then you'll place that card aside in your supply. You don't get rid of the card, you'll keep the card, because in the second half of the game, when you are going through someone else's dungeon, you flip all those cards over, and you use these same cards, the same cards that you use to seed your dungeon, you use them to navigate the other player's dungeon, the dungeon that they built for you. And so, for example, with the dragon, you learned the Heart of Fire. So you now know the Heart of Fire. And with that comes 3 health. You gain, I don't know if you can see that, but you gain 3 health, and you can fill in 1 square. That's pretty weak. But on the flip side, so when you put the dragon in your dungeon, you filled up a lot of room. So that's the kind of the give and take on these cards. So for the Jabberwock, so that's what you filled in for the Jabberwock, a 3x2 grid with 3 icons. On the flip side, you get a mana and you fill in this shape with 3 cells in it. And then finally the Hippogriff. And I'm just giving you examples here. There are a lot of other monsters in the game. With the Hippogriff, you learn the Burning Cloud spell, and you fill in a 2x2 space, 4 total cells. Lots of different shapes to fill in. And I found while playing, I've only played it once so far, but I found while playing that, so the strategy I took was that I didn't fill up my dungeons as much with monsters, and rather I focused on the bottom of the cards, and I was like, okay, I'll go for the big shapes so I can really run through someone else's dungeon. But I found that actually small shapes or different shapes were also really helpful to navigate the other dungeons when that time came, because there were times where I could use a giant shape to fill up like most of someone's dungeon or most of someone's layer. You're filling in these layers one at a time, crossing off squares in them, and then receiving damage based on the squares that you haven't filled in yet. So I might fill in a lot of these squares, but then I only have a few left that I still need to fill in. So a mix of the two is great, but I love the idea that when you're doing this draft, you're paying attention to 2 different things. You're paying attention to this dungeon that you're building, but you're also paying attention to the eventual impact, because you're going to have these same cards when you have to navigate someone else's dungeon. And also, just so I don't miss this, one clever little touch to this is that in addition to these cards that you're using to navigate someone else's dungeon, you also receive the final hand of cards. So when you're doing this draft and the draft ends, the final there's 5 extra cards that'll be left over. I can't remember actually if it's your remaining hand. No, I think it's from the next player. So you receive the 5 cards from the next player, and you actually shuffle those 5 cards in with all the cards that you selected. So it adds a little bit of chaos to a lot of the decisions that you've made, which makes it more interesting. But you still have a hand of cards to choose from when you're navigating someone else's dungeon. Really cool. Oh, and I don't want to forget one other thing. Lots of cool things about this game. It has maybe the best pens that I've seen in any game. I tried to find the best pens for Rolling Realms, but I think this pen is even better. It's a really sturdy, thick pen. It's a bigger pen. It's bigger than the normal pens that you might see in a roll and write game. Nice eraser on the end, and it's a really nice fine tip point here. So I don't know if you can get the same pen where you look for dry erase pens, but they're really, really nice pens, especially if you need a fine tip. Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If any of this reminds you of other games, obviously there's echoes of Cartographers, Stone Spine Architects in here, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any other games that echo these mechanisms, or if you've played Dungeon Maker Deluxe, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Thanks.